What if Earth's greatest weapon against an alien invasion was its love for paperwork? Imagine aliens landing, expecting an easy takeover, but finding themselves bogged down by endless compliance audits and fictional tariffs. We buried them in red tape and watched as their mighty empire crumbled. Curious how a simple document could topple an interstellar regime? Stay with us till the end to find out. It's a story filled with unexpected heroes, epic confrontations, and the sweetest revenge through bureaucracy. Share your thoughts on this incredible twist. Mark Wilson shuffled through yet another stack of papers, eyes glazed over from hours of bureaucratic monotony. He took a swig of cold coffee, wondering for the umpteenth time why he chose to work in public administration. Because someone has to navigate this towering inferno of paperwork, he thought dryly, smirking at his own exaggeration. The office was quiet, save for the occasional tap of keyboards and the hum of the AC. It was almost calming until the ground began to tremble, knocking Mark's coffee mug off the desk. He looked up, scanning the room. His coworkers were equally stunned, freezing in their seats. "All right, who forgot to feed the parking meter? Because it feels like we're about to get clamped," Mark joked, but his quip fell flat. The tremor grew stronger, and a bright light flooded the room through the windows. Everyone rushed to the windows, curiosity overcoming their initial shock. Outside, a colossal spaceship descended, dwarfing the city's skyline. "Is that?" Emily Chen, his office mate and occasional lunch buddy, was wide-eyed. "An epic case of aggressive parking, I'd say," Mark muttered. Then he remembered Emily was there. "Yeah, it's a spaceship. Alien, most likely. We're screwed." Phones buzzed and a PA announcement blared. "All personnel, evacuate immediately. This is a code red." Mark grabbed his satchel, Emily close behind. They joined the chaotic stream of people heading outside. The scene was surreal. Sky darkened by the looming ship, streets buzzing with confusion and fear. He thought about cracking a joke to ease the tension, but decided against it. A loudspeaker crackled from the craft overhead. "Attention, humans! I am Overseer Zenthar of the Asarites. You are now subjects of our empire. Comply with our demands, and no harm will come to you. Resisting is futile." "Well, they sure know how to make an entrance," Mark whispered to Emily. "Very kind of them to give us the resistance is futile speech. Saves us time." A smaller craft descended swiftly, landing in the central square. Military personnel were called in, forming a barrier. Weaver, the town's police chief, was shouting orders. "Everyone, stay back. We need order." An alien delegation emerged. Dressed in elaborate robes, their leader, a tall, scaly figure with an air of arrogance, held a massive scroll. "We come in peace," it began, the lie as transparent as their intricate robes. "Here are the terms and conditions for your compliance." Mark nearly laughed aloud. "Terms and conditions? This is like a toaster manual from hell." The alien speech was met with murmurs and whispers from the crowd. Mark watched carefully, his mind spinning. He could feel a plan forming, half-baked ideas inspired by years of navigating bureaucracy. Zenthar's voice cut through his thoughts. "Failure to comply will result in efficiency enforcement. It will be unpleasant." Efficiency enforcement? Sounds like they want to audit our souls. Mark's wit hid the gnawing unease growing inside him. He noticed Emily's hands shaking. "Hey, we'll get through this," he assured her. "We've handled worse. Remember tax season?" A faint smile danced on her lips. "Yeah, how could I forget?" The Asarites handed over thick documentation, their symbols alien yet strangely reminiscent of legalese. Mark's eyes scanned the foreign text. "You know," he whispered to Emily, "the pen might be mightier than the sword, especially if the pen comes with a 20-page appendix." Emily looked at him, realization dawning. "You're not seriously thinking?" "Oh, I'm seriously thinking," Mark grinned. "It's time we show our new friends the true wrath of human resourcefulness." Hours later, Mark sat at his kitchen table, papers sprawled everywhere, Emily across from him. "All right," he said, steely determination in his voice. "If they want bureaucracy, we'll give them bureaucracy. Let's drown them in the red tape they cherish." Emily nodded. So, where do we start? Mark took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the challenge ahead. The humor flickered in his eyes. First, we learned to speak Aseritese. Then we turned their system into one big, happy knot. As the sun set, casting long shadows over the cluttered table, Mark felt a surge of excitement. For the first time in his career, paperwork wasn't just paperwork. It was their weapon, their hope, and maybe, just maybe, their ticket to survival. Mark sat hunched over his desk, surrounded by both stacks of human paperwork and piles of the alien documents. He had managed to decode some of the Azerite symbols, thanks to Emily's linguistic prowess. The alien script was just like their ships, complex, over-engineered, and oddly ornate. He found it both fascinating and absurd. "Check this out," Emily whispered from across the room, pointing to a line of text. "I think it says something about import tariffs on toothpaste?" "Because nothing says intergalactic domination like minty fresh breath," Mark quipped. He scribbled a note. In the last few days, most people had either resigned themselves to their fate or were too paralyzed by fear to act. Mark's new mission? Prove just how underestimated humans could be. "Hey, paper pusher," Emily called him. Her nickname for him had turned from a tease to something strangely affectionate. "What's our next move?" He looked up and smiled, sly and dark. "We flood their system, confuse them so badly they'll start questioning their sanity. Even an empire built on paperwork can crumble if it's buried under enough red tape." Emily nodded, filled with a renewed sense of purpose. "I'm in. How do we start?" Mark began to outline his plan. "We first submit this absurdly complicated request for an interstellar trade license. I've drafted it. It's 50 pages long, referencing hundreds of non-existent protocols and treaties." Emily's eyes widened. "This is brilliantly insane." "That's the idea," he replied, grinning. "We need thousands more like it. Fake mergers, absurd trade disputes, fictional tariffs. If it looks official, we'll submit it." Days blended into nights as they worked tirelessly. The documents they created were absurdly detailed, filled with countless footnotes and references. Mark had never felt so alive. His dark humor thrived in the irony of saving humanity through the very mechanism that had once made his life mundane. They submitted their first batch. The results were almost immediate. Zenthar and his bureaucrats were overwhelmed, their once impeccable systems bogging down under the weight of nonsensical paperwork. Mark and Emily watched with a mix of amusement and satisfaction as the Aserites stumbled, their frustration palpable. "Got a message from Zenthar's office," Emily said one morning, barely holding back a laugh. "They're requesting clarification on Section 42.3 of the Trade Compliance Addendum, page 38. Mark grinned. "Perfect. Here's our response." He handed her a 50-page document detailing nothing but the historical import data of rubber ducks from a fictional star system. "Let's see them untangle that mess." Weeks passed, and the city remained under the looming shadow of the Aserite ship. But there was a shift. People began to notice the cracks in the aliens' facade of invincibility. Mark's strategy was making waves. The Aserites, with their rigid belief in order, were scrambling. One evening, Emily looked up from another round of document creation. "Mark, do you think we can really pull this off? Bring down an empire with paper cuts?" "Absolutely," he replied, his voice steady. "They're built on bureaucracy. All we're doing is jamming the gears, and I'm willing to bet their arrogance won't let them see it coming." The next day, Overseer Zenthar made a public appearance, his usual calm demeanor replaced by visible agitation. "Humans," he growled, addressing a crowd from a hastily erected podium, "your attempts at resistance are futile. We control." Mark interjected from the back of the crowd, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You control what? An endless pile of irrelevant forms? By the way, did you get my request for a zoning variance on that fictional factory we're definitely not building?" Laughter rippled through the crowd. Zenthar's eyes burned with frustration. "This is not a game, human," he spat. "Oh, but it is," Mark shouted back, his tone mocking. "And right now, I'm winning." The Overseer retreated, clearly perturbed. It was a small victory, but one that emboldened the city. People began to approach Mark and Emily, offering help, submitting their own bogus documents, and coming up with new ideas to further disrupt the Assarites. As Mark lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling, he couldn't help but think, so this is what it feels like to be a hero. A dark, sarcastic hero, but a hero nonetheless. He chuckled quietly to himself. His paperwork-driven rebellion was gathering steam, and he knew they had only just begun to show the Assarites what humanity was truly capable of. Mark sat in the dimly lit basement that had become command central for their rebellion. The room was cluttered with papers, laptops, and hastily snatched meals. The walls were covered with diagrams and maps, an elaborate clutter that spoke of both desperation and ingenuity. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, eyes focused and intent. "Mark, you've got to see this." Emily's voice broke his concentration. She waved a document in front of him. Her face lit up with both excitement and exasperation. "The Assarites just sent a compliance audit request for that made-up manufacturing plant you mentioned." He couldn't help but chuckle. "Oh, so they took the bait?" He grabbed the paper, scanning it quickly. "Looks like they're finally starting to drown in our red tape." "Red tape? More like red tsunami," Emily sighed, shaking her head. "This would almost be funny if it weren't so insane." "Don't you see? This is perfect," Mark said, standing up and pacing. "We've got them running in circles. Every document they process takes them further away from controlling us. We're turning their own system against them." Emily rolled her eyes but smiled. "Only you could turn bureaucracy into a weapon, Mark." Suddenly, a knock on the basement door made them both jump. It creaked open, revealing Police Chief Weaver. His face was serious but held a trace of admiration. "We've got a situation, Mark. Zenthar's forces are planning another public address. They want to tighten the screws on us." Mark smirked. "Fine, let's give them something to address." Out in the square, people gathered in nervous clusters. The massive Assarite spacecraft loomed above, a constant reminder of the alien presence. Zenthar appeared, flanked by his aides, all looking irate and almost frantic. "Attention humans," Zenthar began, his voice amplified by unknown technology. "Your continued disruptions are unacceptable. We demand immediate compliance." Mark nudged Emily. "Showtime," he whispered, stepping forward. "Hey Zenthar, how's that compliance audit going? I heard rubber ducks are all the rage in the interstellar market." A ripple of laughter spread through the crowd. Zenthar's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Your insolence will not be tolerated. This defiance will cost you dearly." Mark's grin widened. "Insolence? No. This is just us being thorough. You see, we humans take paperwork very seriously. You might even say it's our specialty." The overseer's face twisted into a snarl. "You're meddling in affairs beyond your comprehension, human." "And yet," Mark retorted, his tone growing more intense, "here we are, making you jump through hoops you set up yourselves. How's that for comprehension?" The tension in the square was palpable. Every eye was on Mark and Zenthar, the stakes feeling higher with each passing moment. Mark could feel his heart pounding but pushed the fear aside. "You think this is a game?" Zenthar's voice was a dangerous hiss. "You will regret this." "Maybe," Mark conceded, his voice steady. "But here's the thing. While you're busy sorting through our so-called compliance issues, we're planning, we're organizing, we're uniting." Emily stepped closer, placing a hand on Mark's arm. "Everyone here knows the truth. Your empire is only as strong as the belief in its invincibility. And right now, you're just another bureaucracy, buried in its own nonsense." Zenthar's frustration was clear. "We will not be defeated by paperwork." "Oh, you will," Mark declared, voice rising. "Because for all your technology and power, you forgot one thing: the resilience and ingenuity of the human spirit. You may have the hardware, but we have the heart." The crowd erupted into cheers. People who had once cowered now stood tall, inspired by Mark's defiance. The Assarites, for the first time, looked shaken. Mark took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. His plan was working, but the battle was far from over. Back in the basement, they regrouped. Emily looked at Mark, a new respect in her eyes. "I can't believe you faced off with Zenthar like that." "He had it coming," Mark replied, leaning back in his chair, exhaustion creeping in. "But we can't stop now. We have to keep pushing. Every document, every disruption brings them closer to collapse." Emily nodded. "I'll start drafting more documents. We need to keep the pressure on. Mark looked around, seeing the determination in his friends and allies. All right then, he said, feeling a surge of determination. Let's show them just how chaotic we can be. As they delved back into their work, Mark couldn't help but think, this was never about paperwork. It's about proving that even in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds, humanity can find a way to fight back. He chuckled to himself. Let's see just how deep this rabbit hole goes. The basement buzzed with activity as Mark's ragtag team of office workers, students, and anyone else willing to fight the Acerites turned their rebellion into an art form. Papers stacked to the ceiling, laptops whirring, the smell of stale coffee filling the air, a perfect symphony of organized chaos. Mark, you've got to see this, Emily said, rushing over. Her eyes were wide and she looked both nervous and excited. We just intercepted a communication from Zenthar's ship. They're mobilizing. Mobilizing? How? Mark's mind raced, dark humor settling in the pit of his stomach. Let me guess, deploying paper shredders? Emily shook her head. No, this is serious. They've had enough. They're planning a full-scale crackdown, raids, arrests, the works. A grim silence settled over the room. Mark finally spoke, his voice carrying a touch of dark resolve. Well, if they're ready for a showdown, so are we. He gathered his team. Listen up, everyone. We've poked the bureaucratic bear, and now it's coming at us with claws. That means we double down. We submit everything we've got. Fake tariffs, absurd compliance requests, ridiculous trade disputes. We overwhelm them beyond their breaking point. People looked nervous, but also steeled. The shared unease was palpable, but so was the determination. They worked through the night, ceaselessly feeding the beast of bureaucracy they'd created. Dawn brought a tense calm. Mark and Emily, running on fumes and sheer will, stepped outside to catch a breath. The air was cool, the city quieter than usual, a stark contrast to the chaos simmering beneath the surface. Emily broke the silence. Do you think we can really pull this off? Mark looked at her, his dark humor softened by a rare sincerity. We have to. We're all in now. They think they can break us, but we're proving that mountains of paperwork can work both ways. Just then, a booming voice echoed through the city's streets. Zenthar's face appeared on massive screens, his expression one of rage and desperation. Citizens of Earth, your resistance is no longer amusing. Effective immediately, any subversive actions will be met with severe consequences. Comply or face extinction. Mark felt a chill but refused to show it. Guess they can't handle a little paperwork. He turned to his group, determination flaring. Everyone, positions. We need to be ready. Moments later, Acerite drones patrolled the skies, and ground troops began marching through the streets. Mark watched from the basement window, heart racing but mind clear. Emily tapped his shoulder. Mark, it's time. They hit send simultaneously on dozens of laptops, releasing a deluge of documents into the Acerite system. They watched the status bars inch slowly, knowing the chaos to follow. The response was almost immediate. In the alien command center, confusion reigned. Screens flickered with alerts and notifications, each document piling onto the last. Mark's strategy was working, their systems choking on the volume of bogus paperwork. But the Acerites were determined to crush the rebellion. Troops stormed buildings, searching for the source of the uprising. Mark and his team huddled in the basement, tension filling the air. We're not just fighting for ourselves, Mark said, his voice low but fierce. We're fighting for our freedom, for our right to exist without being drowned in someone else's bureaucracy. This might be the weirdest war ever fought, but it's our war. The door crashed open, and an Acerite soldier stormed in, weapon raised. Hands up! You're under arrest for... Mark stepped forward, his dark humor unyielding even now. You want our hands? Sure, but you'll be buried in paperwork by lunchtime. Chaos erupted. Emily managed to slap a fake compliance sticker on the soldier's armor, a final act of defiance. The Acerite faltered, momentarily confused, giving the humans a precious second. They dashed out, scattering into hidden tunnels and alleyways. The city wasn't safe, but Mark felt a strange satisfaction. They had survived another day, and their paperwork assault was causing real damage. We'll regroup, he told Emily as they slipped into another safe house. This isn't over, not by a long shot. She looked at him, eyes fierce. So what's the plan? Mark's grin was tired but resolute. We keep hitting them where it hurts. They're drowning in their own system now. The more tangled they get, the less control they have. One form at a time, we're breaking their stranglehold. As the night wore on, the team's resolve didn't waver. They knew the odds were stacked against them, but they also knew that their unconventional warfare was working. Humanity's greatest strength was its unpredictability, and they were just getting started. In the end, Mark thought with a dark chuckle, who would have guessed that bureaucracy could be the ultimate weapon? The safe house was dark, lit only by the glow of computers and the flickering candlelight. Mark sat hunched over his laptop, fatigue pulling at his eyelids. Emily handed him a cup of instant coffee, its bitter smell a poor substitute for the real thing. Here, she said, her voice strained but steady. You need this more than I do. Thanks, Mark muttered, taking a sip and wincing. Nectar of the gods. The room was filled with anxious faces. People huddled in small groups, whispering plans and sharing updates. Mark stood up, clearing his throat. All right, listen up, everyone. We've pushed them to the edge, but now Zenthar's got his eyes directly on us. We need a final push, something so convoluted it'll make their heads spin. Emily handed him a tablet. They're calling it Operation Clarity. They want to root out all dishonesty and confusion. Ironically, their last desperate attempt to restore order. Mark chuckled darkly. Clarity, huh? Well, let's give them a clarity they'll never forget. He tapped on the tablet, pulling up a detailed schematic. Here's the plan. We're going to submit a massive false requisition for a planetary compliance audit on their entire fleet stationed here. It'll be so intricate that by the time they're done figuring it out, we'll be free. Apprehensive murmurs filled the room. Weaver stepped forward. Sounds bold, Mark, but if this fails... Mark looked around, his face serious but his eyes glinting with a dark resolve. If it fails, it won't matter. This is our best shot, folks. And let's face it, if we're going out, might as well go out in a blaze of paperwork. They worked through the night, crafting the most complex, absurdly detailed set of documents they'd ever forged. Every form linked to another, buried under layers of bureaucracy designed to break even the most diligent Acerite clerk. Dawn broke, casting a pale light through the cracks in the safe house. Mark looked up and saw the fatigue in everyone's eyes. But more than that, he saw determination. Ready? He asked, voice calm but commanding. Let's do this, Emily said, pressing send. The next hours were a blur. Surveillance cameras revealed the Acerite ship in turmoil, their command center frantic. Overseer Zenthar himself appeared on the screen, his once confident facade cracking. This is madness. No civilization can function under such chaos. Mark couldn't resist. He hacked into the broadcast, his image appearing beside Zenthar's on every screen in the city. Welcome to our world, he said smirking, where chaos is a form of art, and you, Zenthar, are our latest muse. The Overseer's face contorted in rage. You insolent! Oh, relax. Consider this an interstellar lesson in humility. You came here believing you'd crush us with ease. But now look at you, drowning in your own arrogance. The people around Mark cheered. The realization hit them. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about reclaiming their lives and their planet. Zenthar's voice growled through the speakers. This is not over, human. We will find you and you will pay for this disorder. Mark cut the feed and turned to Emily. Time for our final act. Ready to disappear? She nodded. More than ready. We've got a few safe houses left. Let's make sure they never find us. Slipping through the shadows, Mark and his team scattered, each heading to separate locations. Mark felt a strange mix of exhilaration and dread. They had thrown their final punch, but the battle was far from won. Hours later, huddled in yet another dimly lit basement, Mark waited for the inevitable fallout. Emily watched the screens, monitoring the Acerite communications. Slowly, triumph turned to confusion, then chaos. Documents piled on documents, tasks became impossible to track, and systems began failing. And then, the unthinkable happened. The Acerite ship, overwhelmed and struggling to maintain control, began to lift off. It was a slow, painful ascent, marked by visible disorganization. "They're leaving," Emily whispered, disbelief coloring her words. "Mark, they're actually leaving." He let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. "We did it," he said, almost in a daze. "We actually did it." The basement erupted in cheers, the walls echoing with the joyous cries of people who had just reclaimed their world. Mark leaned back, eyes closing for a moment. "Is this what victory feels like?" he wondered. "More paperwork for some unfortunate soul, but freedom for us." Emily hugged him tight, tears streaming down her face. "We're free, Mark. We're actually free." He hugged her back, a smile breaking through his exhaustion. "Now, let's hope we never have to fill out another form again." As the Acerite ship disappeared into the sky, Mark couldn't help but laugh. Who would have thought? Saved by bureaucracy. Maybe there's something poetic in that after all.